Welcome to all our collaborators of the Catholic Wire. This is Father Zepeda. In this short video, we're going to talk about what we should do in order to prepare a good episode for our podcasts. And the first thing I'm going to say is we do need to prepare for the episodes. There are some exceptions. For example, the program of Back to the Faith, I don't really need to prepare much because all I'm doing is asking someone else to tell me their story. But when we are talking about a particular topic and we're trying to give to people doctrine or good advice, then in those cases we do need to do some brainstorming, some preparation. So the first thing I'll say is we do have a scheme, we do have that document that we came up with that kind of gives you a clue of what you need to prepare. The first thing is you need to have certain points that you're going to cover in your podcast. And so we can say 3 points, 4 points, particular topics that you want to address, that you want to teach people about. These points, determine them when you are brainstorming for your episode, determine them in a very general way. You don't need to specify much. The next thing we need to have is the questions that you want to ask the person that you're interviewing, or even if it's just yourself, the things that you want to talk about. And here, it's very important to say we're not trying to put you in a square box. What you're supposed to do there is get a general scheme of things of what you for sure want to deal with, and then from there on you can go on the side if there are other topics of interest that come about. But if you have those questions that you want to answer, if you have those topics that you want to cover, then you will be sure that you are conveying something that is of interest to your audience. So other things that you need to consider is this. First of all, who is the person that you are talking to? And secondly, who is your audience? Why do I say this? Because first, when it comes to the person that you're talking to, you need to realize what is the information that they have, what is of interest that you want to receive from them, what are the topics that they are really good at that you want to bring out. Some people are very interesting and they are very wise, but they will not say things unless you get it out of them. So you do need to have those things, like be aware of the information that they have that you need to bring out. When it comes to your audience, you need to realize that you have a particular group that you're aiming for. In our case, it's very broad. For example, the young woman, you're aiming at all young women, Catholic, non-Catholic, traditional Catholic, not modernist or the people that go to the modern church. You're aiming at everyone. So that gives you a very, very broad spectrum. Same thing goes for the young men, but each show has a particular audience, and you need to realize that. Say, for example, let's say that I am making a show that is aiming at seminarians. Then if I am interviewing a priest, I'm going to try to get out of him information that will be relevant to the seminarians. And that's something that we need to keep in mind as we are doing our episode. So far we have these things. Think of the person that you're talking to. Think of your audience and what are their interests. Think of the points that you want to cover and the questions that you want answered, or the actual topics specifically that you want to discuss. It is a good idea to write it down, and it is a good idea to write it down and to send it to the person that you're talking to. And when you do this, do specify that this is not a command, this is not something that you are imposing, this is just something of a guideline so that they're not absolutely coming up with ideas at the moment. You have to help them prepare themselves, because when you give someone that in advance, they'll think about it and they'll think about what they want to say, and they will have a lot more information and they will convey it in a much more friendly way, in a much more fluent way. While if you don't prepare them beforehand, at the moment of the podcast, yes, they might come out with the right information, but it's going to come cut in pieces and in a hesitant way. Another point that is important when you're dealing with your podcast is do practice the intro and the outro, and practice how you're going to cut. If we do have commercials, practice what you will say in order to cut. There should be no hesitancy there. You were learning, and at the first couple times, of course, we're hesitant. But it's something you actually have to sit down and practice and say, how am I going to do this? And then be steady, be stable in keeping always the same thing. When you're dealing with radio, for people, when you're listening to radio, If you become actually, if you like a certain show, you will want to hear the same thing because that's familiar to you. That becomes kind of a friend. So when you hear the same intro, the same outro, when you hear kind of the same familiar things, that becomes something familiar to you and you like it. So you do need to have a particular way of ending, of coming in. It doesn't have to be the same for everyone. You can come up with your own stuff as long as it's something edifying, good, beautiful, and true. So for example, it's not the same to say, hello, welcome to the Catholic Wire. This is your host, Father Zepeda. And today we're talking about how to do podcasts. That hesitancy alone starts the show and it's like you're immediately stuck. You're immediately going in a way that is kind of boring and not active. You need to start in a way like this, hopefully. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the show The Catholic Wire. This is your host, Father Zepeda, and today we're going to be discussing how to do a good episode for your podcast. So you need to have a confident voice, a powerful voice, that immediately you attract the attention of your listeners. Now, something that is important too is if you feel that the conversation is slowing down, if you feel that the conversation is becoming boring and perhaps heavy for you, it's going to become much more boring and much more heavy for your listeners. So you want to keep that moving. If you're feeling that the energy is going down, you need to bring it up back. How do you do that? With a joke, with a story, cut the conversation a little bit and talk about something else in a natural way, of course. There is something that you need to have in regards to the talent of actually leading the conversation. And this brings us to our next topic. You, as the host, you are the one that leads the conversation. You're the one that is supposed to keep it. The podcast episode is kind of your work of art. So you need to think of the conversation that you want to have. You need to think of what it is that you're trying to convey. And then you come up with that work of art. And in that work of art, you bring your host as well. Some basic rules when you are interviewing or talking to someone: let them speak. When they make a pause, then you talk. It's a good idea for the podcast host to actually do a little bit of comment, not too much, but it depends. But you have to do, it's a good idea to actually have a conversation. They say something, you convey something back, and then from there on, you keep moving in your ideas. Another thing to keep in mind when we are preparing for podcasts is actually to do some research. If this is a topic where you need the help of a priest, let me know. If this is a topic where, for example, let's say that we're talking about public schools, and then you can actually go out and do some research about public schools, come up with some statistics, come up with some interesting facts, come up with some recordings, especially if you are the main speaker, if you are the person that is actually doing the talking. It's a good idea to come up with some recordings and some clips. And later on, we will show how you can actually put the clips in the recording, in the audio. You can even have them in your phone ready to show and just play them on the microphone. And that sounds good enough, at least for a beginning of a podcast. Another point that is interesting in the creativity that you can display when you're doing your podcasts is to actually come up with the structure of the show. It doesn't have to be just an interview and you talking and someone else talking. You can add a lot more to it. You can add, for example, quotes. You can add, for example, some interesting news on something. You can add stories, and that would be really good actually for the young woman and the young man. We do want to have stories added here and there, and especially if you're covering a particular topic and you can do some research to come up with some edifying, useful story, then that's going to be very, very useful for people. We will give you some training later on to know how to actually edit audio, how to add music back and forth, and how to play the commercials. But those are the main things I believe that we need to know in order to create a good episode for a podcast. Something else that you have to consider is using a pop filter. So you have the microphone here. I bought a pop filter, which is, actually I didn't buy it, I got it. It's like $10, $15 perhaps to buy it at any store. And you can actually put just this right below your microphone, and the pop filter should be about this distance probably. Now your mouth should be about 8 inches from the microphone. So for example, you would be talking about this at this distance of the microphone, and of course aiming towards it, and that makes your voice sound a lot clearer. Now the pop filter is in order to avoid this popping noise that is very annoying. If you have the pop filter, then you won't be hearing any of that popping noise. One other point to discuss is the volume of your voice. You should always have good volume in your voice so that the viewer is attentive, and you want to keep your voice at a point that is actually a little bit aggressive in a certain way. Aggressive, I mean in the sense that it's actually calling for attention. You don't want to have your voice go mellow, but you should change your voice back and forth. Make it go up, make it go down, make it laugh, make it laughable or soft sometimes. Change your volume in a certain way, but make it in such a way that you will keep people attentive. And the other thing is this: you need to keep also your guest at a certain level of voice, and do feel free to tell them in a kind way where you will not pressure them. Tell them sometimes, you might want to speak a little bit louder so that we can hear you properly, or so that our hearers can hear you properly. If you get someone that is very calm in your voice, do ask them, and they will take it. They will take it nicely if you do smile and do it in a kind way. Another point that is quite important is to actually pray to the Holy Ghost. Pray to our Lord that He will give you inspiration to come up with information that is useful, that is wholesome, that is edifying. This should be done before the show, not during the show, and pray with the person that you're talking to, and then just go ahead and do the show in a calm, relaxed way. Remember that at the end, you are doing a conversation with a friend, and that's how this should be. Do try to come up with some practical notes, things that people are going to be able to listen to, and they will say, wow, that's a really good idea. I really want to put that in practice. I really want to have that. Or some inspirational things that at the end of the show, people will hear it and they will want to advance towards more. Two things that are very important, and we will always insist on that, is always try to remain positive, try to do things that are building up rather than just pointing out the evil or the flaws. Try to do something that is actually going to build people up. And the second one, and I think we all agree on this, is that we are not acting as teachers. We're all imperfect. We're not telling people what to do. We are telling people what we want to do and what the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church teaches to us to be the best path, the right path. That's what we're trying to do. We're all in the same road. We're all failing. We are all getting up from our mistakes, and we're all trying to improve. So we're not telling anyone that we're better than them, but we're just saying this is what we're aspiring for. We want to share those goals with you so that you can come with us in that same goal. We will end this short video with an instruction. If you want to find topics for your podcasts, there are several things that you can do. The first one is brainstorm. Just sit down and write down what are some topics that would be of interest to cover. It would be good to talk to other people, and you will find many topics, but write them down, because otherwise you will forget. And other things that you can do is actually look into other media that are covering the same topics or the same interests, and from there get their ideas, not to copy, but from there you get inspired and you can get some other ideas or other topics, or even cover the same topic in a different way. And that brings us to something else. Don't be afraid to repeat topics in your podcast. Sometimes you will cover a topic, and maybe after a couple of weeks or months, you will cover that topic again, maybe in a different perspective, maybe with a different host or guest, maybe with different stories. But it's a good idea to repeat, because we are covering doctrine that refers to morals, to prayer, to theology, and these things is good to repeat them because we do forget. So don't feel bad about repeating, as long as you do it in a way that is good, wholesome, entertaining, that provides the user with something useful to apply in their lives. That will be all for this introduction. In other videos, we will cover some tutorials on how to work with your computer and how to use your computer to edit your podcasts or change things here and there.